Sri Lanka President Dissanayake puts India first. Red threat looms over India-Sri Lanka ties. After years of turmoil, unrest in Sri Lanka, can Dissanayake usher in a new era?
Sri Lanka's new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, is on a 3-day visit to India, his first foreign visit after assuming office, reflecting the significance of the relationship between the two countries. It also marks the success of India's neighbourhood-first policy. On his maiden visit, President Dissanayake assured that Sri Lankan territory will not be used for any activity that is detrimental to India.
And I have always also given an assurance to the Prime Minister of India that we will not allow our land to be used in any way in a manner that is detrimental to the interest of India. The cooperation of India will certainly flourish, and I want to reassure our continued support for India. Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, journalists. After becoming the President of Sri Lanka, this is my first foreign visit. And I'm so happy that I was able to come to Delhi on my first state visit. I want to thank India for the invitation extended to me, and also for the warm hospitality that was extended to the whole delegation, including myself. I want to thank Honorable Prime Minister Modi and President Murmu for that support and hospitality. This visit paved the way for the cooperation between the two countries to be developed further.
Now, President Dissanayake met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi today, where the two leaders held bilateral talks, while the Lankan president expressed gratitude to India for helping his country during its unprecedented economic crisis. 2 years ago, Prime Minister Modi said that India had supported Lanka through lines of credit and grants worth $4 billion. The Indian PM also emphasized on the defense cooperation agreement being finalized soon between the two nations.
पूरी तरह सहमत है कि हमारे सुरक्षा हित एक दूसरे से जुड़े हैं। हमने रक्षा सहयोग समझौते को शीघ्र अंतिम रूप देने का निर्णय लिया है। हाइड्रोग्राफी पर भी सहयोग की सहमति बनी है। हम मानते हैं कि कोलंबो सिक्योरिटी कॉन्क्लेव क्षेत्रीय शांति, सुरक्षा और विकास के लिए अहम प्लेटफॉर्म।
Now, India, remember, is Sri Lanka's third biggest bilateral lender after China and Japan, and therefore it is pertinent that Colombo will have to walk a tightrope in maintaining a stable and friendly neighborhood. New Delhi is a key trading partner for Colombo. Indian exports totaled $4.1 billion to Sri Lanka versus $1.4 billion to India. The two countries signed 4 MOUs on financial aid to students in Jaffna University, railways, taxation, and training of civil servants. Now, it's also very interesting to see how Anura Dissanayake, a leader who has almost entirely through his political career so far been anti-India, now try and better his and his country's ties with the same nation. Let's try and get a wider perspective and understand how this relationship really moves forward and how the two countries' relationship will impact the regional order and stability. On the show, I'm joined by Mr. Jehan Perera, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Ambassador Suresh Goyal joins us, and Professor Madhav Nalapat, Geopolitical Expert, also joins us. Good evening and namaskar to all of you gentlemen. Mr. Jehan Perera, let me begin with you. You know, this is an interesting turn of events as President Dissanayake chooses India as the country that he visits first after assuming office in his overseas trip. And this is a president, a politician who's won the election on an anti-India plank. Was that time just politics, a politician just playing politics, or has there been a realization in Sri Lanka that, you know what, we need India, we need good friendly ties with our neighbor, and for that, India being a powerhouse in the region is significant?
I don't think it's correct to say that President Anura Kumara won the election on an anti-India platform. His platform was completely different. It was about corruption, system change, a new order to Sri Lanka. It was not on geopolitics at all. Now, it is true that Anura Kumara's president, his party policy in the past had been anti-India, but that was much before he was a decision maker. The party has evolved over time, and Anura Kumara's president, his thinking also is, no, I don't think it is anywhere anti-Indian. And when I saw the way he dealt with, it spoke to his audience in India, and with Prime Minister Modi present, it seemed that he was very much interested in showing the appreciation that Sri Lanka has, because what happened in 2022 was a landmark in changing the way Sri Lankans think about India, because India was our savior at that time. There was no one else who was willing to bail us out, and India stepped in. So I think that there has been a sea change in our relationship to India. I also think that this government, Anura Kumara's government, is a very rational, pragmatic government. And if you look at things pragmatically and rationally, our allies, our markets are in the West, with India. It's with the US, with the EU, Japan, India. So, I think this Indian obsession with China is to overestimate China's influence, because our people know that our interests actually lie with the West and with India and with Japan. But of course, we would like to get more resources from China if we can. But we also are aware that in the past, that the Chinese assistance to us has been misused. It has been used for corrupt reasons, and China has gone along with it. That is also there. But nevertheless, China is a big power, big economic power. It can do a lot for our economy. So therefore, we will want to also engage with China, but not at the cost of India and the West.
Okay, a couple of important points that you made there, Mr. Perera. Let me get Professor Madhav Nalapat into this. Professor Nalapat, let me begin by what Mr. Perera said about President Dissanayake not being anti-India. And then we'll, of course, come to the China factor later into this conversation. What do you think of it? Do you think that, the president has changed? Do you think that he was never anti-India? It was just something that was perceived as that? Or do you think now that, that realization has come, and now that the politician has become the president has taken over, and now he wants a good relationship with the neighborhood?
Well, I must say that my esteemed co-panelist, Jehan Perera, he is known as a very good analyst. And of course, he is also now known as a great diplomat, frankly, because the fact of the matter is that the new president of Sri Lanka did something very welcome. He made a complete change in the policy on which his party was founded. That is the bullet. And he chose the ballot, I think, very sensibly. So that's a complete 180-degree turn that has been taken by his party. And I must say that, those who remember the days when his party was using the bullets rather than the ballot, it's a very welcome change. So I would like to say that I think the president is a mature, seasoned politician, and I think he understands where the world is heading. The world is heading into two separate blocks. One, of course, there's China, because of circumstances, in a sense, created by others maybe. There's Russia, there's Iran, there's North Korea, and on the other side, there's India, there's Japan, there's Australia, there's the US, that's the Quad. There are the other markets that Dr. Perera very sensibly pointed out are critical to Sri Lanka. And I can tell you that you cannot play a balancing act for very much longer, especially where security is concerned. May I say that the previous president, I mean, the Rajapaksa, not the previous president, Ranil was he's a thorough gentleman. So are the Rajapaksas, Mahinda, for example. But the fact is that they collapsed on the issue of Hambantota. Hambantota was touted as a game changer for Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
That the era of prosperity would come.
Yeah.
The Belt and Road and Hambantota would make Sri Lanka a land of milk and honey. It's a beautiful land, a beautiful people, but I'm afraid very little milk and very little honey. So the fact is that the Chinese wanted a naval base there. And if a naval base is ever given to China by any government, it will be a hostile act not only to India, but to its friends in the Quad, to Europe, and to various other countries. I'm very happy the president chose India for his first visit. And I'm hopeful he will avoid the trap of walking into the Chinese snare. The Chinese give you beautiful promises. Of course, they look after elites very well. And you can have a comfortable holiday in Switzerland and settle your children in the United States with what they give you. But the fact is, wherever you see Chinese resistance, you see the people are impoverished. And when people are impoverished, they are not happy. So I'd like to point out that the downfall of the Rajapaksas was this great belief in the transformative value of the Belt and Road and Chinese assistance, whereas the fact is the actual transformation is that offered by Prime Minister Modi and India. And I'm delighted to see the Sri Lankan president here. It's a wonderful country. I love Sri Lanka, and I'm very, very happy he chose India as his first visit, and I'm very, very happy.
Sure, I think
that the Prime Minister
that people-to-people relationship exists, and it's only flourished over the past several decades, Professor Nalapat. But let me get in Ambassador Goyal into this conversation. Ambassador Goyal, the China factor, Hambantota port, something which was of significance to both India, China, and Sri Lanka. The China factor really playing up once President Dissanayake won the election. Now, of course, he's here. But do you also see Sri Lankans realizing that dead diplomacy is something that they should be away from, that they should alert themselves of?
I think the election of President Dissanayake proves at least one thing, that for once in Sri Lanka, the Tamil versus Sinhalese schism may be resolved for once at least. Because from what I understand is that the Indian politics or the Sinhala versus Tamil politics is not the most important part of the election of Dissanayake. He was able to get strong support from the Tamils, and therefore we have to look away from that kind of internal political dynamics for once, number one. Number two, if President Dissanayake has chosen to visit India, and our own EAM, Jaishankar, visited there within the first fortnight of his election, clearly demonstrates the amount of importance that both India and Sri Lanka attach to the relationship with each other. And the visit itself has proved that we continue to really look at each other very, very seriously. In that context, we cannot simply say that China can be wished away. China factor is there. China factor is going to continue. Hambantota port you mentioned. Sri Lanka is part of the BRI. What we need to see really is, are we going to judge our relationship with Sri Lanka purely from the Chinese prism? Or are we going to build up enough of bilateral content so that the linkages between between India and Sri Lanka grows enough to make the Chinese threat that much less important? Now, that can be done easily because not easily, but it can be done, because Sri Lanka does depend upon India for economic, trade, investments. Uh, South India is so much closer to Sri Lanka than any other country, really. So if we develop enough of the economic linkages,
But Ambassador Goyal,
if
then
we
can I
develop
understand from you, is there a dehyphenation between India and China? How does Sri Lanka view this? Do you think there's a dehyphenation between how Sri Lanka, deals with China and how it deals with India, or is it always the India-China balancing factor that is going on?
Shreya, I think what I'm saying here is that at the moment, Sri Lanka hyphenates India with China. And we need to develop enough linkages between India and Sri Lanka to the extent that that hyphenation is diluted. And that's the only way to really develop a dependable, reliable, strategic partnership with Sri Lanka, which is very important for our own maritime security, for our own. Mr. Nalapat mentioned about the Prime Minister mentioned about Colombo Security Conclave. Now, that's an important part of the security matrix here in the region. So that's the only way to do it, not to hyphenate China with India. And I think we need to focus in that direction.
Okay. Let me get in Mr. Perera into this. Mr. Perera, you said there's an Indian obsession with China, but, we have reasons for thinking that China is not dehyphenated from the India-Sri Lanka relationship. Like Professor Nalapat said, like Ambassador Goyal said, there is always that Chinese investment, Chinese infrastructure that is being talked about when we talk about Sri Lankan territory and Sri Lanka. And therefore, this doesn't seem to be an Indian obsession. It seems to be a serious concern.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I agree with you, and maybe I shouldn't have used the word obsession. But I think that if Sri Lanka's policymakers are rational and are pragmatic, as I believe the NPP leadership is, then they will see that their interests lie more with India, because India is part of the democratic world system, which includes the United States, the EU, and Japan. And therefore, they would align themselves more closely with those countries and not with China. And it is now well understood in Sri Lanka that India's security concerns have to be given utmost priority. And I saw this in what President Anura Kumara said in his address before Prime Minister Modi. He made it categorical that that Sri Lanka, one thing, would look to India to protect our own sovereignty and independence and territorial integrity. And at the same time, we would give priority to India's security concerns. So I think that those are the parameters. And within those parameters, we will, of course, want to get more economic resources from China if possible, but not at the cost of our relationship with China, if we follow a rational policy. Now, what happened in the past was this, that our leaders, utterly corrupt leaders, took Chinese resources, probably very likely benefited personally from those Chinese resources, created white elephant projects, which put us into severe debt. And in fact, the Chinese ambassador very recently, he said, it's up to the country to use the resources we give well, and we can't help it if they don't use it well. So that is the challenge before Sri Lanka, and that is why Anura Kumara Dissanayake and his party won this election, because our people now realize that we don't want corrupt leaders, absolutely corrupt leaders. So I think we have learned our lesson, and I think
All right, I believe Mr. Perera's network is a little bit of a problem, but we'll try and reconnect with Mr. Perera. But Professor Nalapat, we've been talking about the India-Sri Lanka relationship, and like Ambassador Goyal mentioned, there was a security arrangement conclave that was talked about between the two countries. There was also a defense cooperation agreement that Prime Minister Modi said that the two countries need to finalize soon. In the defense sector, how far do you think and how significant do you think that the India-Sri Lanka relationship will go and is for the region?
Look, Shreya, first of all, I want to point out that India does not basically view Sri Lanka only through the prism of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka. And they're also an amazingly versatile population. The Jaffna Tamils are all across the world, and they're doing exceptionally well, as are Sinhalese. Under Prime Minister Modi, focus has been given to all the people of Sri Lanka, not just the Tamil community, but all the people. And I'm sure the ambassador will bear me out when I say this. Now, I want to point out one thing very clearly. And I'm very delighted that you've got an eminent a strategic expert like Jehan Perera here and a very distinguished diplomat, Mr. Goyal here. I want to point out that the defense relationship is not an obsession. It is a necessity. And not just for India. And let's not forget, Shreya, that someone who I have discussed on these channels and other channels for quite some time, and frankly, someone whom from 2015 onwards, I have been quite favorable to, a chap called Donald John Trump is going to take over as the 47th president of the United States.
Yeah.
Now, Sri Lanka will definitely have to factor that. There's no question about it. Prime Minister Modi is also of the same cloth, firm, determined, decisive, where security is concerned. So one thing we know, like, all right, they may take their loans, but then again to say, I mean, I'm really surprised that our Sri Lankan friends do not know. Every loan comes tied with a condition, which means every $100,000, the Chinese will tell you exactly how to use it. And most of it is used on Chinese themselves. It's used on the Chinese workers, Chinese technology, which is often inferior. You're not allowed to go and bid overseas for other technologies that are much superior and much cheaper. So Chinese are basically building a captive market. At the end of that process, when you're deeply in debt, that's all right. You give your asset to us for 99 years. And so in effect, they're the owners of that. So basically, it's a Ponzi scheme. And finally, the Ponzi scheme collapses and the debtor has to wake up. And then the debtor has to cough up on pain of, losing. I mean, there will be some penalties, I'm sure, on individuals, if not in countries. But this is the reality of BRI. I've studied BRI for several years. And I can tell you, it is very troubling to see how advantage is being taken of vulnerable regions that are precisely located where the PLA wants its future military bases or present military bases. Whether it be in Africa or in other parts of Asia or in our immediate neighborhood. And one thing I can tell you very clearly,
Professor Nalapat, and one will have to see.
We cannot allow security to be diluted by Sri Lanka.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Perera, this has been something that has been closely watched, and with bated breath, it's been awaited how Donald Trump takes things forward from January 2025. What are the concerns in Sri Lanka vis-a-vis the new US president, the China factor coming in, and of course, the new presidency under Anura Kumara Dissanayake?
I don't think Sri Lankans are very conversant with what's happening in the US. I have spoken to US diplomats who have visited Sri Lanka, and basically what they seem to think is that President Trump will follow much the same policy. I mean, that Sri Lanka is not such an important country for the US, for the president himself to be thinking about it. But basically, in the overall strategy, Sri Lanka will figure as before. There won't be a significant change, and if at all, Sri Lanka might become even more important, so that the US would invest more in Sri Lanka because they would want to keep Sri Lanka in the Western sphere of influence.
Okay, okay. I have to wrap this up, but quickly, Ambassador Goyal, 20 seconds. Do
They're
you
quite
see
different
any hiccups
from
in the
Biden.
India-Sri
Quite
Lanka
different.
relationship in the near future?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Shreya.
yeah,
You give me
yeah,
20
okay.
seconds at the end of it. I need no time, and therefore I choose not to use the 20 seconds. Thank you.
We have paucity of time, Ambassador Goyal, but okay. I really have to wrap it up here. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen, Mr. Perera, Professor Nalapat and Ambassador Goyal for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your thoughts on President of Sri Lanka, Anura Dissanayake visit to India, his first bilateral foreign visit, and he chooses India. Let's see how this relationship moves forward. With that, it's a wrap on Global Mirror. News and updates will continue. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye.